Hello, I'm Natalia, and today I'm going to be showing you how I'm making Christine Daaé's Star Princess costume from Phantom of the Opera. I'll be starting with the skirt, and these are the reference pictures that I'll be using. Alright, then let's get started with the fabric. I was lucky enough to find this light pink to dark pink gradient satin at a local fabric store, and I was just really excited that I wasn't going to have to dye it myself. Next, I found this beautiful iridescent organza online that I felt matched perfectly. I'll put the link in the description. As for the pattern, I drafted it myself. It's a full circle skirt, but cut into 8 panels to match her pattern. Alright, and without further ado, let's get cutting. So first things first, I laid out my gradient fabric and got it ready to cut. I got out a reference picture to figure out exactly where I wanted the gradient to line up, and I ended up moving my pattern piece around quite a bit to figure out where I liked it the best. I then used my phone as a weight and I cut out my pattern. The pattern piece I drafted already includes the seam allowance, so I didn't have to worry about adding that on extra. And once that was done, I had 2 perfect pieces. The gradient matched up really nicely. You can cut these out one at a time, but I just did it double-sided and it worked well for me. Then, when all 8 pieces were done, they looked like this. Then I was ready to cut out the iridescent layer. I decided to do these one at a time because the fabric was really slippery and I just didn't want to mess it up. And once you're done cutting out all 16 pieces, they're ready to be put together. You could make these into 2 completely separate skirts and layer them on top of each other. However, I didn't want them to slide around since I'd be adding beading to the seams in the future, so I decided to just baste them together along the long sides and basically look at them as if they were one piece of fabric. I went ahead and layered all the rest of them so they'd be ready to sew. Alright, it's at this point that you're ready to baste the layers together. I took this over to my sewing machine and using a long, straight stitch, I attached the iridescent layer to the satin layer along both of the sides, where I pointed out earlier. You can use pins or sewing clips to make sure that the layers don't slide around on each other, but I just used my hands. Once you've attached all of the iridescent and satin pieces, you'll have your 8 skirt panels ready to be sewn together. I decided to use my serger machine for this so that it would be a nice finished seam, but a normal sewing machine would work just as well. I put right sides together and sewed along the long side. I'll connect all of the panels this way, leaving one side open for the back closure. Once all of the pieces are attached together, it'll look something like this. At this point, I decided to put it on my dress form over the petticoat I'll be using with the costume to see how it'll look. I also, during this time, decided to attach a ribbon as a waistband. I didn't film it, though I just serged it to the skirt. Now it's time for the zipper. I used an invisible zipper I already owned. It wasn't the exact right color and it was a bit too long, but it is invisible after all, so you're not going to see it. There are a lot of videos already about how to sew invisible zippers, and I didn't go too much in depth here, but I do show you my process. I iron the zipper flat, and that's basically my trick. It makes it a lot easier to sew in, and I can go in depth in this in the future if anyone's interested. I used a sewing clip to clip my zipper into place and got ready to sew it down with my zipper foot. One of the most important steps for me when sewing an invisible zipper is making sure that each side lines up perfectly. I don't want one side to be awkwardly taller or shorter than the other side, so I take my time to make sure that it's symmetrical. I use plenty of clips and then I sew it up. Again, this zipper was a lot longer than I needed to get into it, so I didn't sew all the way down, just as much as I needed. I then always test it to make sure that it zips up correctly, and this is what it looks like. An invisible zipper. I will be adding beading over all of the seams anyway, but I still wanted it to be invisible. I then went ahead and tacked down the two bits at the top that were a bit taller for my waistband, and then went ahead to cut down the entire length of the zipper since it went down way further than I needed it to. I used a needle and thread and just hand sewed a knot where I wanted the zipper to stop. Once I was satisfied, I clipped the string and the excess. I also went ahead and sewed down the rest of the skirt, and you're almost done. Here's me putting it back on the dress form to see how it looks, and testing out the zipper again. Now I'm ready to move on to the hem. I decided to cut the length while it was on my mannequin and while it was wearing the petticoat, since that's what I would be wearing under the costume. I wanted to make sure that it didn't cut it too short, since it would poof out more with the petticoat on. Then once you've made a beautiful mess, it's time to clean it up and get ready to cut out the scallops. You could make a nice pattern to make sure that each one is perfectly even, but I was honestly too excited and I just grabbed my water-soluble marker and decided to draw it on by hand. I got out my reference picture to guess how many scallops would be on each panel and started drawing. I was careful to cut each scallop to make sure I got both layers of fabric, though sometimes I had to flip it onto the other side to make sure I got both. Once this was completed, it was time to put it on the dress form one more time. I then went around the edges with fray check on the satin layer and a thin, clear glitter glue on the iridescent layer. In all of the reference pictures, she has a little bit of extra sparkle at the bottom, and I thought this was a fun way to add it. I made sure to be careful that none of it stuck together too much or folded over, and just went one panel at a time. And it's done! This is what the final skirt looks like. I'm so happy with it. It's honestly so fun to wear and dance around in. And I of course could not stop twirling around in it, though that felt pretty in character, so that'll just be my excuse. Also, I know the fabric is really wrinkly. I'm gonna fix it, but I was honestly just too excited to finish the video first. This is what the skirt looks like without the petticoat, so just what it looks like by itself. I still think it's really pretty and really flowy, and I honestly do love it like this. I just prefer to have the poofiness because it looks more like what her costume looks like. Of course, her skirt isn't fully completed yet. She does have beading and star details, though I just simply don't have them yet. I think I'll do all of the beading of the top and the skirt in its own video. And that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed and stay tuned for the rest of the costume.